Welcome now, the founder, chairman, and CEO of Operation Hope. He is John Hope Bryant. So thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it. You have a particular perspective on what's gone on in Georgia, as well as the larger election. We know that a lot of the people less fortunate have been hit the hardest by the pandemic and the economic aftermath. Did that really drive this election?
No, actually. That was not the primary driver of this election. And by the way, David, thanks for all you do, and thanks for having me. Black America votes in mass as a group, basically twice. When we're super proud, i.e. the first election of President Barack Obama, or when we're super pissed. I think that we felt massively disrespected by some of our national leadership in the last 4 years. Really felt dehumanized. And given the history of this country, where one could argue the largest reverse transfer of wealth happened with African Americans building the core of this country's wealth in the 16, 17, 1800s with slavery and free labor, and we couldn't create capital because we were capital. We thought that was a particular disrespect. The lack of empathy, of understanding the role that we played, and the role of public officials to care after the least of these God's children, which, by the way, often become the primary assets. You know, Sam Walton had a high school education, as you know, David, but is now responsible for the largest retailer in the world. That's what happens when you invest at the bottom of the pyramid. So I think that you had people turn out en masse because they felt they were given I can't say on your program, but they were given a massive disrespect by some of our elected officials, and we wanted to send a message. And I think we've done that brilliantly. Something else is very interesting, David. The place where in the 60s you had Dr. King leading a movement of social justice, which was backed by primarily African Americans and Jewish brothers and sisters, now has a U.S. senator from that same place. That's an African American and one of our Jewish brothers. And it was a coalition of the willing. Yes, blacks were decisive in the presidential election and this one, but we couldn't have done it alone. You have really all races who said, knock it off, America. It's time to get back to business. And let's make America normal again. But let's rebuild her with the best of her bones, which include all of her economic levers in place.
But John, if I can interrupt you, you make a very important point, but there's a distinction there. Making America normal again, in some respects, will not do it. As you point out, there's 400 years now of basically building America on the backs of people who were not equally treated, who did not have the ability to earn the money and amass the capital. What realistically can the black community expect from a President Biden when he takes over to start to change that phenomenon?
Well, and by the way, it's interesting that Reverend Warnock, who had Operation Hope's award in the background when you did his acceptance speech, we noted that he actually asked me to put a Hope Inside location at Ebenezer Church, Dr. King's church, about 8 years ago. And so this concept of civil rights and civil rights, that the real color is green, and that we need to provide social justice through economic empowerment, through home ownership and small business creation, wealth creation, is something not foreign to Reverend Warnock. And I think you'll start to see a moderation of him, a moderating leadership from him that I think most people will appreciate. I think likewise, and I've been contacted by the Biden administration transition team, you're going to see, I think, a focus on small business, which is the right place to start. That's where most wealth creation from my white counterparts came from. And there's almost was it $98 trillion, I believe is the number, of my white counterparts. They own 90% of all equities and all wealth in this country. That comes a lot from small business. That's where jobs come from. 53% of all jobs in this country are employers with 50 employees or less. Conversely, half of black businesses were sidelined in the coronavirus, 41%. And 96% of all black businesses, as you know, David, don't have an employee. I'm gonna repeat that. 96% of all black businesses in this country are sole proprietorships with no employees. So how do you create wealth? How do you create jobs when you don't have the mechanism to do so? So I think you're going to see a massive focus on not just some raw stimulus. That's not enough. That is actually can be negative if that's all you do. You have to turn the stimulus into an investment. You're going to see that in, I think, small business, and I think you're going to see it in massive internship programs. I'm talking about millions of internships, not hundreds of thousands.
So there you're talking about private sector as well as public sector. And we have seen some big private companies start to do some of that investment, particularly in the financial services area, which you know so terribly well.
Yeah, once again, it was the private sector, David, in the 1960s that led the effort to desegregate the South because it was bad for business. Very few people know this, but it was not the government that integrated the South. The governor was standing in the door saying, "Over my dead body," oftentimes sounding like what some of our federal leaderships are sounding like today. It was the private sector who said, "Knock it off. This is bad for business. Whether you're black or white, we need some more green. Let's take down the whites only signs from the soda shops, the department stores, et cetera. Let's integrate these places where blacks are coming in to buy." It was the private sector. Once again, David, you have the private sector that's made a $300 billion investment in 2020 alone on social justice through economic empowerment. Companies like Shopify, where I partnered with to create 1 million black businesses. Companies like JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, oh my God, PayPal, all these companies, Twitter, et cetera, who stepped up into this gap. I think the private sector, 90% of our jobs, David, as you know, come from the private sector. Most legitimate wealth comes from the private sector. The fortune here is at the bottom of this pyramid, and the private sector understands they can't get there without black and brown customers. Diverse companies and diverse geographies win. That is a fact. I like math because it does not have an opinion. That is just a winning formula, and the government needs to follow that lead. So the government should be the stimulus for the private sector. I'm talking about massive internships, David. Right. Massive. I'm talking about millions of young people who know that they can, the ladder is repaired, including my white brothers and sisters, by the way, to get that opportunity for the future.
Yeah, it's fascinating, John. Every time we have you on, you open my eyes some. We need to have you back because I really want to go through what you think as a practical matter this administration can do. Does this make the Small Business Administration administrator a critical position in the Biden administration?
I do believe it does. It's been a titular member of the cabinet in the past, but I believe now small business has proven in the pandemic to be what you and I have always known, the backbone of this economy and of jobs. And I think that's going to get special recognition in the next couple of years. I think that people are going to be pleasantly surprised. I think you're seeing it in the way the markets are responding. You're seeing. I had a billionaire friend of mine this morning text me and say, "Well, I guess my taxes are going up for good reason." I mean, so he was like, "Look, I don't mind if they go up. If we're talking about social justice through economic empowerment and uplift and smart taxation, where all boats rise. You're going to have more GDP, more economic opportunity."
So, John, I don't want to let you go without getting an initial reaction to these reports. Now we're seeing that Merrick Garland may well be the nominee for the Attorney General. Do you have a reaction to that?
I don't, but I just trust this administration. I trust that President Biden is not trying to get a second term. I think he wants to rebalance this, to bring some dignity and some reasonableness back. That's his legacy, I believe. I think you'll see a very an inclusive government. I would not be surprised if you start to see, after he checks the diversity box, he starts reaching across the aisle in a more in an even bolder way. I'm very hopeful for the next couple of years, David. Rainbows only follow storms. You cannot have a rainbow without a storm first. And it's time for a rainbow. We're exhausted by the storm.